Welcome back, friends. We are the Four Storytellers, scratching deeper into the fabric of our lives to generate diverse stories and unique characters using our wildly individual and distinct voices. I am Father James Grady, and I'm here to take your confessions. We have Del Shores, the dramatist, Sydney Gilder, the newbie, the amateur, and Nancy J., the journalist, who will no doubt tell our secrets later. Today, I'm not just dressed for Halloween, though I am also dressed for Halloween. Today is my topic, and as a huge horror fan, and also, I've mentioned my obsession with the devil before. I decided to come dressed as the Exorcist and lead us in a discussion about how it is that we utilize the dark sides of our experience, our fears, our discomforts, our terrors, to motivate, to fuel our writing, to give depth to what we do, whether we are interested in the comic, the tragic, or genre fiction. So before I get started, do you guys have anything you would like to say at the beginning?
Well, I just wanted to say that, James, that outfit just made me want to go on my knees and pray this time.
I do want to know, when you say things that scare us, are you talking like arachnophobia, or are you talking like, okay, you're nodding, so I'm just going to stop right there.
No. It's what you were about to say, and the answer is yes, because, or is always inclusive. So, yes, I do mean things like arachnophobia, but I also do mean things like standing in front of class and giving a presentation, or that time that you had a bad experience with your father at the Western Sizzlin'.
Or like your parents got a divorce, and so everything you write is going to be shadowed by.
Or could we say that are we going to be trying to write fearlessly?
Or do we want to try to write to capture our fear? That is, our seeking the darkness can take many forms in our writing, right? We can try to work through it in the form of therapy, or we can try to capture it in a bottle and sell it. I mean, that's what pays Stephen King's bills, right? Is bottling his nightmares to sell to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there are lots of different things we can do with the dark side.
This is supply. I have to say, having grown up in Texas, Southern Baptist preacher's kid, my biggest fear of exposure to myself and to the world and to my parents and to anybody was that I was gay. Yes. And once I addressed that fear, and it started with my play Sordid Lives, which I always say is my coming out play that then became a movie and spawned a lot of other mediums and stories that I got to tell. But one of the darkest periods of gay history for me was when Matthew Shepard was murdered. And his murder literally inspired me to write Southern Baptist Sissies, or a story that related to the murder. And me going into that territory of what I thought I had dealt with in therapy and had not, was truly exploring a dark place for me. It was a dark, sad place for me. And I was
that's absolutely the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. And for me, again, another gay kid who grew up around church. I didn't grow up in church because my great grandmother was open-minded enough not to force me to go once she realized it was harmful. But I remember this scene when I was 11 of being in a church during Vacation Bible School, and all the unsaved children were kept behind while everyone else got to go do activities like making macaroni pictures and things like that, like you do at Vacation Bible School. And the minister praying and trying to bring these people to Christ. And what I remember as an 11-year-old was observing this mass hysteria where people began to be saved in order to save themselves from this situation. and there were 2 of us only out of about 15 kids who didn't get saved that evening. Me and this Latino kid who was Catholic, and I looked at him, he looked at me, and he's like, "We don't do this where I come from," and I'm like, "Yeah, we don't either." But everybody else did, and watching them fall into this peer pressure situation, and at that point, I got this impression of a very horrific situation that has motivated a lot of the scary stories I have to tell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I tell dark stories.
Yeah.
Right? You guys don't necessarily focus in on the dark stories. Del has discussed how how that experience of having the Matthew Shepard situation bring things back to the surface motivated Southern Baptist sissies. What about Sydney? Do you see a role for this dark side in romance?
Oh God, yes, absolutely. We've talked about it before, that a big trend ever since 50 Shades of Grey hit the media was, or is, and I'm talking about heterosexual female-driven erotic novels, would be romanticized masochistic male leads, which really puts BDSM in such a bad light and shows it as an abusive relationship and romanticizing that. And so bringing up and exaggerating masculine traits in fictional straight men that women are assumed and sometimes are drawn to, but making them very toxic and very abusive and dangerous. That is something that my genre of romance has definitely dug into, because, with what 50 Shades of Grey opened up was kind of a door for the lay straight woman to read more BDSM-centered romance novels. But if you truly read them, they are not. They don't stick to BDSM.
What's interesting, as you were saying that, what came to mind before 50 Shades of Grey was 8.5 Weeks. Have you read that?
No, but that's a movie, right?
No, it was a book. Oh. It started out, and I remember reading it inside Barnes and Noble. It's like a little teeny tiny book. And I was just like, oh my God. But and then it became a movie with Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke. Yeah. But it defines exactly.
Was it 8.5 or 9.5?
Well, it was 8.5, 9.5 weeks.
Once you're that size, it doesn't really work.
We all
well, there was 1 week, there was 1 week that was good. So I think it was 9.5 weeks, but it was something like that.
Yes, I remember that movie very, very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that was like one of the first kind of mainstream books, movies to portray those kind of relationships, again, mainstream.
And if you look back, like me, because I've talked about 50 Shades, it came from Twilight, and Twilight shaped me and a lot of girls and some men in my generation. They shaped us as young readers. And looking back on it and thinking to myself when I was like 12, being so in love with Edward Cullen, but looking back on him now, he's an incredibly abusive boyfriend. Incredibly. But we romanticize those things so much that they become normal. And we see it in, movies. We see where the girl getting shoved against a wall and kissed, or him grabbing her arm, or we see it even, whether it's a straight film, whether it's a homosexual film, we see that dynamic that we romanticize and sexualize between someone in power and someone without power. And whenever those lines get blurred because of how we've absorbed it through, film and writing, we romanticize it and we forget that. Yeah.
Acts of violence. I mean, did William Hurt really have to throw that chair through that door?
Yes.
In body heat.
Yes.
Go after Would he have just knocked and she opened the door?
No. That was hot. Come on. That was hot.
But then I think about movies like, was it 16 Candles? What movie is it that young boy who was super popular in the movies as playing the nerdy guy. Like
John Cryer?
maybe he's blonde,
The
he's
radio?
skinny.
Oh no.
No. Blonde, skinny. He did a lot of Molly Ringwald movies.
Oh, yes.
Well, what was the movie that he got put into a car with a drunk girl, and like the boyfriend, Jake Ryan is his name, and 16 Candles, and how they romanticize stealing the woman's the teenage girl's panties, or he's like talks about how I'm like the boyfriend says I'm done with her and you can have her now kind of thing, and he's like this romanticized. It starts, it's like these little things that whether it's a book or those things that are very real to any woman, that fear. At the same time, media romanticizes it and sexualizes it.
Well, I think that demonstrates the element of it where, we allow our fears to, or we allow our anxieties to fuel what we're doing. How is it different when we consciously approach our anxieties and try to write into them? I'm thinking, Sydney, about what you're doing. I mean, there's a lot in your kind of project of trying to write a feminist romance where, you have to be aware of what people are afraid of or what people are anxious about, and try to write into or reclaim some of that space.
Yeah. With my, like what I said was my book is feminist conscious, like with how I'm writing it and the tropes of romance that I choose to use and how I build my female characters and my male characters. I'm trying to write them through the eyes of a woman like myself who has become more educated on what I will and will not accept in a relationship. And so balancing the world of fantasy and reality is very important to me because, when I read a romance novel, I want that they get so caught up in each other while they're fighting, they make out kind of thing, and the kiss and that but what I don't want is the demeaningness. I don't want he's in power over her, but the lines are blurred and consent. I do not like it at all when consent is ever a question when it comes to sex scenes. Like those kind of things, those little bitty layers in books, especially romance novels that we don't really notice, build us up to there. And I want to be able to build the tension, the sexual tension in a book and have it be alluring without it being abusive to the mind, to the emotions, to the psychology of the reader, kind of thing.
And I guess that's why I wanted to introduce this idea to you guys in terms of how what frightens us motivates what we're writing, because it's kind of like the difference between getting caught up in a nightmare. So much of what when we see writing in romance and other genres where these tropes are taken for granted and glorified or romanticized, it's like being in a nightmare, and what you're afraid of is in charge, and you're letting it lead you. Whereas if you're watching a good horror movie and you're in control and you understand what's happening, it's a different story. And when we write, it can be a different story if we're in charge. If we're aware of, what we're doing with relationship to our own fear.
Yeah.
But James, so you've written in the horror genre before, right?
I have.
I was the kid when I was growing up. If I saw a horror film, I would get a pillow and a blanket and crawl into my parents' room and sleep on the floor. I mean, I'm not talking about 8th grade or 6th grade or 5th grade. I'm talking about sophomore in high school.
I'm with you.
So scared. And then of course, Kevin Williamson became one of my very good friends early in his career. And so I'm like watching the opening of Scream before the first edit. And I was going, so I want to know, do you get scared when you're writing this stuff? I mean, because for me, my imagination is so crazy. I've never, I mean, it's not a genre that I've ever attempted, but do you scare yourself a little bit as you're writing?
I do, but you have to, right? Because if you're being honest with yourself about what you're writing about, and why it's scary to you and exploring the deepest elements of that, it's actually scarier than if you just had a spooky story around the campfire, right?
Right.
Because you're figuring out why this scares me, and then you're one-upping it because you're getting to the core of it, and that's what you're focused on is the actual core of the fear itself. But it's also why I wanted to talk about it in terms of other genres that are not horror, right? Because your example of Matthew Shepard, right? Like, you thought that you had something under control in your own psyche, or you had intellectually understood something that this event revealed to you.
Here's what happened with that. I was reading a magazine. It had just happened, and I think how Newsweek comes out immediately with the story, and they were talking to one of the girlfriends in an interview, and they showed a picture of her where one of the killers lived with his girlfriend, and on the wall was a picture of Jesus Christ, and that's what I saw in the background, and my mind started going a little bit nuts, and I thought, I wonder if they justified that murder in the name of the Lord, because I heard such vitriolic hatred and rhetoric coming from pulpits as I was growing up. And so I started having conversation with someone I love and adore, and the whole thing, well, we don't hate the sin, we don't hate the sinner, we hate the sin, we love the sinner. And but I think at a young age it clouds, because it clouded for me what that self-loathing, and so then I started writing just monologues, or just from Mark's point of view, the lead of that I didn't know what it was, and then I started discovering, I have a lot to say about this. I have a lot to say about this, but it scared me so much. I mean, just the sense memory of it right now, it gets me emotional. It scared me so much to reveal this part of myself, and to also, I was so scared of the church that I was so scared of that vengeful God that I don't even know if I believe in anymore. But I was scared that something would happen to me, something would happen to my kids, that there would be punishment involved if I told this story. And what was really beautiful about it is it was a gift to myself, that it changed everything for me. It was my therapy. It was my path out of the darkness, and that part. And I used to have nightmares about the rapture. I mean, if there was a loud noise, I would burst up. I would just leap up out of bed, thinking that I was going to be left behind. And writing that play changed all of that for me, because I wrote about it. And then I saw that my story was a lot of other people's story as well.
But I think it's interesting, right? Because you can dig down to what it was that was the scariest part of that, and then play it out, and it's that Aristotle's idea of working through things emotionally through drama, right? And as you were talking about what it was that scared you, I'm thinking I'm thinking classic horror, right? Like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because they're these Christians who are out there with their smiling faces. We love everybody. But inside, they're aliens. They're monsters. They're violating all of their own tenets, and they have hate. And they're, you could have gone in any number of directions. You went into sort of a more, there's sort of a comic element, but also a tragic element. But you could have gone straight horror with it. You could have gone Stepford Wives.
Yeah, it was interesting because when the reviews came out, the LA Times said it was a tragi-comedy, which I love that they. Because there was a lot of comedy instances, but I always say that the title of the play is a little bit deceptive because it's much more dramatic than.
Now, I know that something I relate to so much with Nancy's writing, and you touch a lot on your relationship with your father, which I know as young girls, and I know young men also deal with it. This, especially with your dad being of the generation that he was from, that fear you have of your dad, this disconnect you have with your dad, and it reads so well.
Don't call it a fear. No, I'm being serious. No. It is not a fear. Disconnect, yes, but it is not a fear by
You
definition.
what about like, I know that like when I read the way you talk about your dad, I relate to it so much because growing up and you mentioned it a little bit with how your mom and your dad's relationship, something that has always been my biggest fear. And growing up and my sister's getting older, it scares me and breaks my heart that they also had this fear, is marrying someone like our father. We had this, all three of us have a huge fear of doing this. And it's because of my mom and how the way she talks about him and stuff. And so that kind of fear and how the fear of how the way he treated you and the way you were raised and your relationship with him, how that has affected you throughout your life.
There is no fear. I mean, what you all are talking about is so out of my realm of experience. Being seriously, I don't have any true fears that I either acknowledge or admit to, but I don't. I mean, it's really walking down the street at night. I mean, I'm trying to grasp this. I get fearful. I get scary movies. I loved it. I mean, Wait Until Dark. Do you remember that one, Dell, with Audrey? Yeah, was it Audrey Hepburn? She's blind, and it's one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. And then I watched it again not long ago, and it wasn't scary anymore. But I'm just saying, I don't get the definition of fear as you all are defining it. And I mean, Sydney,
there's nothing that scares you, like death doesn't scare you. There's nothing like, getting COVID doesn't scare you, or going out. I get anxiety every day.
I mean, anxiety, but that's not fear. I mean, I guess.
No, it is a form of fear. It's absolutely a form of fear. I respectfully disagree with you. For me to go outside and to worry about how I touch things and how if I'm going to see somebody that I love and give or get this awful disease, there is fear. And I know that is fear for me. It may not be for you, but that is a definition of fear for me. And that manifests anxiety. And I honestly think that a lot of, that fear does perpetuate art. And I think we're going to see a lot of art come out of this period.
I think part of the reason why anxiety appears to be fundamentally different is because of it's like the slow burn version of terror. It's not, it lacks the intensity, but it makes up for the intensity for its duration. Very often if we experience terror, it's extreme, but it's short term, right? The circumstance that inspires it passes quickly. Whereas periods of anxiety, I'm thinking now of like the way that, say, Jean-Paul Sartre would describe it. They last a very long period of time, and it's soul beating almost, the way in which, like Dell describes, it's like a constant low grade fever of worry, but it doesn't, it hides sometimes. But it's there.
Maybe maybe it's just semantics then. Maybe my definition of fear. Maybe it's just because I'm a big old sissy, y'all.
Knowing Nancy and knowing who she is, I think that any fear you've had in life, you've been able to work through, because that's who you are as a person. You think well and you think through, and a journalist. So things are factual for you. So I guess, what's under my bed or what's hiding in the closet or what's going to jump out and scare me is not scary to you because it's not a hard fact. But what about, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whenever you were my age, did you have a fear that you worked through, or did you have movies or writing or art that helped you work through a fear you had at a younger age? I'm going to pull it out of you one way or another.
I don't. I mean, nothing scared me.
You're not scared of spiders? I'm terrified of spiders.
No.
I'm 23 years old. Nothing crawls on me.
No, a snake. I mean, but it's not a fear. I mean, it's not a fear that the
It's
snake.
a respect.
What?
It's a respect for snakes. It's like, okay.
I just, okay. The only time I can ever remember being afraid that my parents were going to find out that I played spin the bottle in 7th grade. And I remember thinking to find out, and it was my best friend and her brother and his best friend. Now that meant that her brother, I was going to be the only one he could kiss, and it was just, and I didn't like anyway. It doesn't matter, but I was just so afraid, and I prayed. I was like, please, dear God, don't. I thought I'm a slut. That was a slut. I am such a bad person. I'm such a bad person. And then we laughed about it, but it wasn't. But that's not a fear. That's afraid.
So your perception of being a slut. Well, that's or that.
I would like to pose this to Dell and Sydney with Nancy sitting aside.
We need to see at least an R. Yeah, there you go.
So we've all heard your writing, Nancy.
Okay.
And we've all experienced it. Dell, Sydney, are there elements of Nancy's writing that you find resonate with you because they instill in you a sense of anxiety or fear? And I will give my example. Mm-hmm. Nancy, when you drop those little moments about your mom and dad fighting physically, that creates in me an intense feeling of anxiety and fear. And that's what makes your writing resonate with me. The fact that you don't associate that with fear yourself may be an aside. Part of what makes it resonate with me is that it is fear-inducing. Wow. And I don't know if Dell and Sydney have a similar experience.
Philosopher, and I'm just
No. I vibe with that. Anytime she anytime I mean, I've already said it a bunch of times, the dad, and that's with any art, literature, movie, anything, dads. But especially the way that Nancy talks about it. And I relate to that fear. It reminds me of being a little girl and watching my dad and seeing him as this super distant person who was pretty much all he was disciplined with the belt, or he was like, I'm here on Christmas morning, give me a hug. Those were the parallels that I was dealing with the father. And so those moments you have alone with him, and also like that moment you mentioned this past week of this one-on-one with your father and the crying. Like my dad has only cried once in his entire life. My mom can attest to it, and so can my grandmother. But seeing a vulnerability, seeing that kind of moment that made me scared in a way, because I put myself in that shoe. I was like, what would I do if I ever saw a vulnerable part of my dad? And I think that if it happened to me, I would become very vulnerable, and being vulnerable makes me scared.
So, and I guess what I would now point out, right, is that when Sydney says she associates with the fear she sees, what she's really saying is that, Nancy, what you write causes her fear, right? So, Sydney, I think the reason why Nancy's arguing with you is because that same situation that she's writing about isn't a scary one to her.
Yeah.
But part of the reason why it resonates with Sydney and it comes across to us as really good writing is because it does make us emote in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it makes us feel, and it's what I relate to Nancy's piece, and we had very different kinds of fathers. I mean, but there's the lack of communication and her seeking to know him better. That's where my dad was almost like an alien to me, because I think I've told you, the last thing he said to me is, "I've never understood you. But I do want you to be happy." But I could flip that and I go, I never understood you. I never could understand you. And I could never get you to accept who I was. And I desperately needed that validation, or I thought I did. And I got it with one sentence, when it was all said and done at the end. But anytime that Nancy writes about that need, it's almost like a need. It feels like to communicate further, and it's not available. Does that make sense, Nancy?
Sure.
That resonates with me.
And so
That distant death. You know, I
I
don't.
don't mean to scare anyone. I certainly don't mean to scare anyone.
but
No,
Nancy,
you write very good horror, Nancy.
the thing is, right, like when you think about, again, I'm going to go philosopher. When you think about strong emotions, love, fear, hate, hope are some of the most strong and universal emotions. And so again, it doesn't have to be scary to you to scare people, you know? So for you to write authentically about your experience with your father causes anxiety in people who have fraught relationships with their father. Whether you experienced it that way or not, I think it attests to the quality of your representation, that it speaks to all of our experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And so,
there's a little bit, and that's what I love about writing, where, you know, as I always say, I write for me, and then you said, oh, someone said, you know my family? Have you been eavesdropping on my conversations? And it's amazing how our own experiences can resonate with other people. And I mean, Nancy and I grew up very, very differently. I mean, you know, Nancy, I always say, you know, when someone died in my family, it cost me money because someone has to pay for the funeral. But so I didn't have the kind of privilege even that Nancy had. It was very different, but on a human level, it all just resonates. It's like I love what she's writing.
Well, and James, I thank you as the philosopher for bringing this topic, because I didn't think it would end up being kind of, you know, compliments from you all. But it makes me realize that maybe my story, what I'm writing, can possibly find an audience, because I think that's a whole nother topic. Don't you think?
I think so.
Well, it is a good topic, but boy, you never doubt that. You are so wrong.
Well, maybe that's what scared me. It scared me that no one would find it.
I knew we'd find something.
There, we got it.
Failure scares you. We got it.
Well, I think I'm going to have to get a drink this time.
So everyone will stay tuned for a future episode where we talk about imposter syndrome and the fear of not finding an audience and not being good enough for that audience. But you know, in all seriousness, you know, what I wanted to focus on was the idea that we tap into and utilize our fears to touch an audience. But I think what Nancy's part of the discussion really brought up is that authentic explorations of experience, even if they're not scary to us, can still reach out to those scary places that people live in, and can help people work through their own fear and trembling, and maybe come through to a better understanding of themselves.
Yeah, this was a really deep. This got deep, y'all. This
did.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Well, definitely, we hope to see you again next time, whatever we happen to be yammering on about. And Nancy, Sydney, Del, thank you all for sharing some of your fears or not fears, Nancy.
Or lack thereof.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.
All right, guys.